a minute to share with us in the text box, what is your number one strategic goal this year for your advocacy efforts? We want that to be front and center for you today as we're going through this, because we want this to be interactive. We want you to start using this strategically today so that when you leave this, you have a good idea in mind of what you want to do and how you want to get this out into the media. So, what's something you want to see featured in the media that's part of your strategic goal today? And if you feel comfortable, please share it in the text box. So, we're just going to give you a minute to do that. And again, if you haven't shared who you are and the organization that you're with, that would be a great thing to do right now. And if you're not affiliated with an organization and you're new to this and you want to meet more people that are doing this, please take the time to let us know that as well. Okay, so I want you to write down what you shared with us in the text box if you haven't written it down already. And I want you to set that aside because we're going to come back to that. It's an important part of what we're going to do today. So what we're going to cover today is talking about reaching out, taking the initiative to talk to the media, redirecting and reframing, which is how you don't have to answer the question the way somebody asks us. And again, this is not just for the media, but important and challenging conversations you could be having with your local government, your city council people, your mayor, etc. And then recommend. We are solution storytellers. So we want you to always have solutions ready and not just asks. And I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he's going to talk from very personal experience. We need to hear you, Jim. You're muted.
Trying. There we
Okay,
go.
there you go.
I'm going to take the 3 points that Melissa just gave us in a slightly different order, but I am going to touch on all 3 of those points. And I want to start by talking about what makes an interview feel challenging. And then I'll offer a couple of strategies for making that experience go more smoothly. And everything that I'm covering here is based on my own experience of having spent 5 years as communications director at CalBike, working at the state government level, and 6 years as executive director at Sacramento Area Bicycle Advocates, the regional bicycle advocacy organization. Next slide, please. First, I want to invite you to...
Did it move?
Nope.
Hold on just a second. I'm going to try this another way. Okay, we seem to be, hold on just a second. We're gonna get through this, guys. It just does not want to play nice today. How's that? Can you see it?
We can see slides.
Okay. All right, we're gonna go old school then here. How about that?
Sure. Let's back up 2 slides, please. Yeah, there we go. First, I want to invite you to let go of any stereotypes that you may have about the news media and journalists. The news media is not the enemy, even if you're not happy about the way they're covering your issues. In the 11 years that I worked at CalBike and Saba, I spoke to the media, I think probably at least 100 times. Most of that involving local media and local issues. And I cannot actually recall one time when I felt that the interviewer was being unreasonably tough with me. Think about what it is that makes a solid news story. The journalist is looking at all sides of the issue, doesn't automatically accept opinions as facts, and digs deeper for clarity. Ideally, that's what they're doing when they interview you. If they ask pointed questions or they seem skeptical, it's because they're doing their job, and you shouldn't take any of that personally. I, I think it's best to think of an interview as part of a mutually beneficial relationship between you and the interviewer or the news outlet. Your knowledge and perspective help them get a better story, and they're giving you access to a wider audience. So it's definitely a two-way street. But it's not the interviewer's job to make it easy for you or to let you off the hook, even if you have a good relationship. Your discomfort in an interview situation doesn't mean that you're being treated unreasonably. Instead, I'd like you to reflect on what makes it feel tough for you and how you can prepare and improve. Next slide, please. So, what are some of the challenges you'll face? I want to cover three challenges that I experienced myself. And all of these are things that have crossed my mind when I'm getting ready to talk to the media. The first one is that I'm not sure what to say. As an advocate, everything that you do and say should be in the service of a defined, measurable, short or long-term goal. That's what frames what you communicate to the world and how you do it. If your campaign or program or organization hasn't gone through the process of defining its strategic goals, an interview, or for that matter, a meeting or a presentation will be tougher for you. If you don't have a strategic plan, you should think about developing one. That's really, really important. And when we went through a strategic planning process at Saba and came out with a clear set of goals, it actually made it a lot easier for me to communicate with the media. And that kind of leads to the second point I want to make, which is you want to know your talking points. This isn't as complicated as it might sound. You don't need to write out every point you want to make on every possible issue you could be asked about. For one thing, you don't know in advance exactly what you'll be asked about in an interview, so memorizing a script isn't going to be helpful necessarily, but you should strive to be fluent on the issues you're likeliest to be asked about. Keep in mind that most interviewers are contacting you because of what they know or have just learned about you or your organization or your perspective. You're going to be asked about the issues and ideas and concerns that you already work with. What you say in an interview likely won't be new to you. So I hope that helps kind of bring down the stress level when you know you're going to be asked to talk to a reporter. A second thought that may come to mind is that it's difficult to answer clearly and concisely, for example, because the issue is a complicated one. There's a tension in some interviews. Not all issues lend themselves well to sound bites, and not all interview formats allow you to say everything you want to say on the subject. And so you're going to be navigating with those tensions. I found it easier to be interviewed for a newspaper story, for example, because that just felt more conversational. I could explain something in detail, the reporter would take notes and figure out how to convey it in the finished news story. So it was really truly an interview with the reporter asking me questions so that he or she could understand the issue better. By contrast, an on-camera TV news interview felt more challenging to me because TV news tends to work in sound bites. And by the way, this is also true for radio news. Most local TV news stories are 1 to 2 minutes maximum, and you're usually one of several people who will be featured in the story. You may end up with no more than 10 seconds of screen time, despite having been interviewed for 10 minutes or more. And this happened to me repeatedly. So you have to think about making every word count. Once I kind of understood that that's what I was dealing with, I started to think in terms of the shortest, most concise explanations I could give, like really simple sort of grade school level explanations. And once I started doing that, TV interviews became a little easier for me. Um, One way to do this is to watch the local news and study how people are interviewed and pay attention to what kinds of quotes get used and how the speaker delivers them. You can learn a lot by just watching somebody in a local TV news story. You may also find it useful to think about your most important issues and boil those talking points down to concise sound bites. You may even want to practice them alone or with a colleague so that you're ready when the media calls. In other words, what is your 10 or 15-second point that you want to make about a particular issue? This is a skill that you can develop, and it will get easier for you. But that doesn't mean that everything that you cover uh, can adequately be covered in a soundbite. You need to do justice to your issue. So don't hesitate at the start of an interview to state that the issue is more complicated than you'll be able to cover in a couple of brief answers. Just make that clear right up front. If necessary, be prepared to focus on the single most important concern or concept. This traffic signal will save lives. That's a very concise way of covering maybe what is a complicated issue. If you have additional details that you weren't able to cover in an interview, ask if you can email them as soon as the interview's over. The interview itself isn't the only conversation that you're having with this journalist, and this is a point I'll kind of be making a couple of more times. Next slide, please. The third thought that covers my mind is no matter what I say, it won't be enough. And that's because the issue is maybe highly controversial. This challenge manifested for me as sort of performance anxiety. You feel like everything's on the line, and you worry that no matter what you say, it won't help solve the problem. And that makes an interview feel like a make or break situation. But in truth, it's almost always part of a bigger discussion that involves the news media and the public. So what you're being asked about is not the only time you're going to be asked about it. When you're prepared with a clear message and you can deliver it effectively, a challenging interview is rarely a game changer for the worse. So I'll tell you a little story. In Sacramento, for more than a year, we had a lot of public discussion about people riding bikes on the sidewalk in the central city, where there were lots of offices, restaurants, and pedestrians. And then one day, a young man riding on the sidewalk hit and seriously injured an older woman as she was leaving her apartment building. And she turned out to be a retired reporter with the local daily newspaper, and she had lots of contacts at City Hall. So news about the collision went public very quickly. I started getting calls from the news media, and very soon the city council was being asked to ban people from riding bikes on the sidewalk. And this issue dragged on for months. As you can imagine, it felt like a no-win situation for me. I couldn't defend the bicyclist without appearing to condone his behavior or diminish the seriousness of the victim's injuries. I couldn't condemn the bicyclist without feeding the persistent narrative about bicyclists being lawless and irresponsible, because that would just make it harder to argue that people on bikes deserve safe accommodation on the streets. So when I was asked by reporters to comment on the incident, I acknowledged that the incident was horrible, and I expressed concern for the victim, and then immediately pivoted to talking about the incident as a symptom of unsafe infrastructure. People rode on sidewalks because they didn't feel safe riding in the street. The lack of safe bike infrastructure put everyone, people walking and people riding, at risk. I tried my best in these interviews to keep the focus on a solution that had the greatest benefit for everyone, even when the dialogue seemed to want to head in a different direction. And I suspect a lot of you have had that experience in either meetings or in your dialogue with the press. My position didn't make those interviews any easier, and it didn't make the issue go away immediately. But I went into it and I went through it with a clear and what I felt was a clear and rational position. And ultimately, the city council committee that was considering the sidewalk ban came around to our position. So by sticking with it, we finally got we steered the conversation in the direction that it needed to go. I wasn't going to change hearts and minds by what I said in those media interviews. Between those interviews, I was delivering exactly the same message to the city council members and to our allies. The position I was expressing in the media wasn't separate from the larger public discussion. And that's what I mean by the interview isn't a make or break situation. It isn't the only time you're going to be speaking to that issue. Next slide, please. And now I want to take a couple of minutes and run through two strategies that made interviews a little easier for me. Um, the first one, oh, next slide, please. Know where the interviewer is coming from, and let them know your point of view before the interview, whenever possible. In other words, try to start the interview before the interview, if that makes sense. Um, this was also a chance to address any misunderstandings the interviewer may have had about the issue that we were discussing. So one time I was called with about 15 minutes notice to do a TV news interview about a fatal bike crash. Um, at that time, a legislator at the Capitol had introduced a bill to make bike helmets mandatory. And many of you will recognize that this is a very hot button issue. The reporter who interviewed me was somebody I had been interviewed by before. He was a smart guy, a good guy. And as he was setting up the camera, he asked if I knew whether the victim had been wearing a bike helmet, because that was sort of the issue that everybody was thinking about. And I told him I didn't. And I said that that really wasn't the right question to be asking me. We didn't know about the particulars of the collision, such as vehicle speed or what injuries the victim suffered. Instead, I said, if it had been a high speed impact, a bike helmet likely wouldn't have made any difference. So this was my opportunity to educate the reporter before the interview began. And in this case, he ended up not asking me on camera about the bike helmet. So it was a worthwhile effort because, in my opinion, talking about the bike helmet ignored the infrastructure problems that put the bicyclist in danger in the first place. So long as you're polite about it, you don't have to answer the question the way it's asked to you. You don't want to ignore a question. You don't want to appear to dodge a question, but don't be afraid to rephrase a question from your perspective in the spirit of honesty, clarity, and accuracy. Back to the sidewalks controversy, I was invited to be on a public affairs talk show on the local public radio station. I asked by email what the show would cover, and the producer said the host wanted to talk about the need for educating bicyclists about riding safely. And I replied that he could expect to hear me talk about infrastructure, not bike skills, as the root cause of the problem. Again, I did what I could to preemptively direct the interview away from what I thought was an unproductive discussion. And if this sounds manipulative, keep in mind that the producer invited me because I was a subject expert. So I think I'm pretty qualified to tell them whether their question is on point or not on point. Also, media interviews put our issues before a large audience. I never wanted to miss that opportunity by talking about issues that weren't central to our mission. In other words, I was always going to come back to the mission. The key point here is you're the subject expert. The journalist is contacting you because you know more than they do. And the knowledge and experience you bring to the interview will make their story better. Remember, this is a two-way street, as I said before. With print journalists, interviews were likely to be scheduled in advance by a few hours or even a day, and that gave me time to prepare what I was going to say and maybe gather a few facts that I wanted to have at my fingertips. TV interviews and broadcast interviews are a different beast because they're typically set up with very short notice, usually a few hours before that day's evening news. It happens this way because a reporter will either pitch or be assigned a story for the evening news by the afternoon, at the afternoon story meeting. That's when they decide what's going to go on the evening news. And then they have a few hours to pull it all together. It was not at all unusual for a reporter to call me and say that he could meet me in 15 minutes. So I had no time. Except with a couple of TV news reporters who specialized in transportation issues. I think there were two that I dealt with who did a lot of transportation stuff. I was usually interviewed by a general assignment reporter who knew almost nothing about the subject other than what they learned in the past hour or so. So when we'd meet, it would take the crew 10 to 15 minutes to set up the cameras and get me mic'd up in position. And while they were doing this, I'd ask the reporter how much they knew about the subject and could they give them a quick overview. I was kind of shameless about this, but they'd always accept, and I'd have a few minutes to deliver the elevator speech about the issue. And because my part of the finished story might end up being 10 to 15 seconds, I couldn't wait for the cameras to be rolling to deliver everything I wanted to say. I wanted to make every moment of my uh, uh, interaction with the reporter about the subject that we were talking about. And by getting my little editorial pitch ahead of time, uh, the reporter would go into the interview with a more complete perspective on the issue and often ask questions that were directly related to what I told them. And I think that made for a better interview. And it sure made me a lot more comfortable in going into the interview. That felt like I really cracked the code when I figured out that would work for me. Next slide, please. The second strategy is sort of an obvious one, but it's really important. And this goes back to the original point that Melissa made, and that is to prioritize building relationships with reporters and news outlets. Um, a lot of us are busy, and it might make sense to wait for the call from the reporter for an interview or a quote. And that is certainly how I approached media relations most of the time. And it worked well enough. But in retrospect, I feel like I would have done myself a favor by introducing myself to those reporters and those news outlets as soon as I took the job as executive director. Like one of the first things I would do, so that so we could become acquainted and they could begin to know where I was coming from. At the very least, I should have done this with the couple of reporters who actually regularly covered our issues. Um, Again, think of an interview as an ongoing conversation with the journalist. What you discuss isn't just what gets shared on camera or on the record. By getting to know them ahead of time and knowing what they're interested in and what they see as concerns, you're able to do a better job, and so can they. It makes this dialogue between the reporter and the advocate a lot more productive for both parties. Um, the other thing to remember is that local journalists are also community members, and they likely share your concerns about livability and safety. That was true for the reporter from the big daily newspaper. He was a daily bike commuter. Um, One time, a very high profile columnist with the daily newspaper, a guy who had this reputation for being very outspoken and combative, called me out of the blue. I'd never spoken with him. I'd never been introduced to him. And I was kind of surprised that he even knew who I was. But he told me about a colleague of his who had been hit on her bike while commuting to work. And he said that knowing her personally completely changed his perspective on bicycling in Sacramento and the need for safe streets. And we had a half-hour conversation. He asked lots of questions. Um, and while he wasn't interviewing me and he didn't end up writing about my concerns, the conversation felt like a really valuable contact with an important thought leader. So that's the opportunity that you have when you can reach out in advance. Another time I was interviewed outside of my office in downtown Sacramento by a young female TV news reporter about a protected bike lane on the street that ran past our office. And we got done talking about it. And after the camera stopped, she said she really liked to ride her bike, but she was afraid to ride her bike in this part of the city. And I said, you're exactly the kind of bicyclist these improvements are designed for. And that was my reminder that these people live in the community. They often share our concerns. And so by developing that relationship, we can go deeper and have a more meaningful discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa.
Thank you for those wonderful stories. And please write your questions down. If you haven't already texted them to Jim, please write them down because we want to make sure we return to them when we get to the conversation in a little bit. So I'm going to go even more into the points that Jim talked about, and I'm going to remind everybody that when you bridge, when you take an issue, a question that somebody's asked you, and you bridge to what you want to talk about, you don't want to just talk about the problems, you want to talk about the solutions. Like Jim said, this intersection needs a stoplight. You know, it's going to save lives. So you want to have 3. So the power of 3 is very important. You don't always have to have that, but don't have 5. Like, so you could just have 1 or 2, but try to keep it to 3 things because 3 are, it's going to be easier for you to remember and easier for the journalist to remember. So, as Jim talked about, you want to simplify your messages to make them easy for you to memorize, easy for you to say, easy for it to roll off your tongue, and easier for other people to understand. And you want to practice repeating them so that they flow naturally. You want to keep your answers between 30 seconds and a minute long. So do work with your colleagues. Make a game of it. See who can get the information down in the simplest, clearest, easiest to understand language, short and sweet. So what I want you to do right now is think about, and I want you to take just 2 minutes right now, and I want you to think about what is one of your most important solution messages that you want to get in the media this year. And I want you to see how you write that down. And I want to see if you can write it out simpler, because at the end of this, we're going to ask people to take a crack at it and share it with us what they discovered. Because the first time we write something out is usually the longest, most laborious way. So just take a minute right now, take a couple minutes right now and think about one of your most important things that you want to talk about with the media. How can you say that in the most simple, easy to understand way? So again, what's one of the most important points you want to get into the media this year? Take a look at how you originally wrote it down and see how you could simplify it. How could you make it so that somebody who is just 10 years old can understand what you're talking about? Why did I say 10 years old? Because that's what network television shows are focused at being understandable to. So if you haven't learned that little trick, that's one of them that they use. TV shows are always understandable on networks anyways, and before 9 o'clock for those who are 10 years old and older. How can you unwonkify the language, make sure you're not talking insider baseball, and make it really clear for anyone, anyone to understand what the heck you're talking about? Okay, we've just got about 30 seconds left, so wrap that up. And again, save it because we want to see if if you are up for sharing that with us. Okay, so we're going to talk about a little bit more about how to bridge to those solution answers that you're bringing forward. So why does bridging work? It creates a path for you to move to the direction you want things to go. It's a way to maintain control of the interview, or if the interview's gone off the rails a little bit, it's the way to get the reins back. And always steer the interview in the direction that you want it to go. And again, remember, this can work for difficult conversations with city leadership as well, government leadership, and get things going to where you want. Because as Jim pointed out, you do not want to waste a precious moment of your time with these influential people getting your important information across. So how do you bridge? Buy yourself some time with pausing. It's okay to have a dramatic pause. It makes people sit up and listen more. So buy yourself time and then maybe say something like, that's a really interesting way to ask that question. In fact, teach yourself when somebody asks you something, have a way to respond that You don't automatically go on the defensive, but you go into something like, that's not really the way to look at it, or that's an interesting way to phrase it, but consider what you want to say, give yourself some more time, and then you move into your bridge. So let's look at some examples of what you might say. What's really important here? Well, it is true about X, and that's why we really need to do Y. I think it would be more accurate to say, and as Jim pointed out, I didn't phrase this exactly the way he did, but he did it really well. That's not really the question to be asking. Let me share with you what is. So the thing is about reporters, and not other conversations, but with reporters, they're used to taking in a lot of information. They might have opinions about some things, but they're used to learning. So when you say that's not really the question to be asking, let me share with you what is, you're not attacking them. You're illuminating something for them that is a really challenging question, right? So you're bringing them a way to see things more clearly and help their viewers, their readers. So let's take an example. And let's say the reporter says something to you like, our city has spent millions of dollars of taxpayers' money on road safety. Why do we need yet another program? You can stop, you can pause, and you can say, I think it would be more accurate to say we've built a system that's inherently unsafe for our most vulnerable road users, including seniors and children. You could change this to emphasize whoever you want, but you can be on the same page with this person that it's important that seniors and children have safe streets. We built this system, we can change it. That's why we want. And then you go not just into an ask. You don't want to say, we want you to make safer streets. We want you to make safer streets by lowering speeds by X, by putting a crosswalk here, by creating this traffic light, by a network of protected bike lanes, by creating sidewalks, whatever it is that's your particular answer to your challenge that you're advocating for, you want to direct the conversation towards. And what you want to do is create a tough questions and bridges worksheet for you and your team. And tomorrow we'll have a handout for you that'll help you get started in that. But you want to think about what's challenging for you and what are your talking points. And you want to make sure questions that you found difficult in the past, write those down, put that in there. And then now, how would you answer it now with 2020 hindsight? Going again to your strategic goals and your communications that you want to get out there. Questions on matters that you'd rather not discuss the way people are discussing. Helmet laws, 3-foot laws, all of these different things where you've heard interviewers because you've done your homework and they just talk about it in a way that just isn't the way to be thinking about it. And then issues that are particularly critical and sticky to address that you want to make sure that your responses are elegant and concise. So now, if you are doing an interview, not on television unless it's a profile about you, but if you're doing an interview in a newspaper or on radio and you have enough time, you want to make sure that you include storytelling to illuminate the solution because stories change our brain chemistry, they breed compassion, and they can motivate people to understanding and action in ways that data alone can't. And again, check out our YouTube channel because we go deep into the science of storytelling and why it's so effective. You and your team need to understand why storytelling is really a superpower. It's not about touchy-feely, it's actually about science. So how do you choose the right story for being interviewed? You want to make sure you don't know everything in advance, as Jim said, but if you're going to be talking about certain key issues, you want to make sure that the stories you choose are the stories that illuminate and humanize that particular challenge, the dangers of speed, why a particular intersection doesn't work, and if you can, the solution. Make sure you have permission to tell the story and that you're ready to tell it really briefly. You can tell a great story under 5 minutes. You can tell a great story under 3 minutes. And your interviewers will love you for being able to do that. Also, it's much better to have one story that you tell in a really compelling way than to come loaded with 5 stories in your pocket, right? So That's why you want to know your stories in advance, because if somebody asks you a question different than what you thought they were going to ask, you can pivot like Jim can now and tell you a different story, right? And as always, the way to get to be masterful at this is to develop a storytelling practice. What does that mean? That means that you set aside time for you and your team, your network of colleagues. You get together at a coffee shop once a month, you get together online once a week, whatever works for you. As part of your strategic goal in your communications area, you develop a storytelling practice so that you start weaving stories in. Now, think about what's coming up, and what our next class is going to be on strategic storytelling. So let's think about Earth Day. Let's think about World Day of Remembrance. It's not too early, months in advance, to start thinking about your stories and your storytelling. Make sure you have permission to tell the stories. Make sure you're telling the story away. If you're not telling your own story, make sure you're working with the person, if they're willing, if they're comfortable, so that you're telling the story in the way that they want it to be told, and it's strategic. And again, you want to make sure that you edit it down to, I say 3 minutes. It can go up to 5 minutes, but really 3 minutes is a fantastic length of time to have for a story so that you are ready and willing and can tell it. And if you have more time, you can expand. But if you can tell it in 3 minutes, it's going to be absolute gold as far as your media relations. Now we're going to get to the part where you get to participate with us, and I'm going to stop sharing our screen in just a minute. So what I want to ask everybody to do right now is, remember that talking point that you simplified? I want to ask who's willing to share what their original talking point was, and if they got it simplified down, and how that's working out for you. What do you think about that? So is anybody ready and willing to share what they wrote down? And I'm not above calling on people, Cynthia Rose. So I just want to let you know. Come on, Joan. I saw you scribbling away there and laughing. What did you come up with?
Well, I did put it in the chat, and
Oh,
I
great,
guess,
great. Sorry, I don't
oh,
see anything in until I come out of this. So I wanna take. So go ahead and share that with us.
it's okay. I guess I can't recall the exact wording from the original iteration of it, but I just threw it in the chat. Bicycle-friendly driver and shift driving training saves lives. That's it, distilled down truly. So
Say that for us one more time.
I basically threw something in the chat that is my distilled version. And I mentioned earlier that I can't remember my original iteration of it, but my statement is bicycle friendly driver and shift driving training saves lives.
You nailed it. That's exactly what you said. Thank you very much. Let's see here. You've got it. You've got it down right there. Okay, so let's see who else has one that they want to share with us. Scott White, you've got one here that you shared with us. You want to go ahead? I can't hear you, but I see that you're not on mute, so I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay, is that
There you
better?
go.
Okay, I'm sorry. I forgot I had the microphone tipped back. We're working on a grant-funded project this year to teach law enforcement about the new safety laws in Texas. And part of that is we started from another grant, but it's about reframing how we talk about safety because people want to get away from accident and stuff. And maybe accident is just so built into what they're doing, we can't get away from it. But we might be able to get it away from that by reframing the whole discussion. So instead of talking about just traffic safety, wherein safety means who knows what to everybody, we can talk about it basically as a part of a healthcare crisis that impacts us all.
Okay, so how did you boil it down? Because you boiled it down in
Okay,
the text. So I want to hear you
yeah.
do the boiled down version.
So part of it is we've really got 2 points here. We've got safety as a problem, but safety is such a loose word that it can have many meanings to many people in terms of how they think about safety. So the trick really is to reframe safety into something they can think about very specifically, which is in this case a healthcare crisis or a health crisis.
Okay, good. I'd keep working on it. I think you can get it honed down even more, but I know the minute we ask you to do this, in your head, it was very clear, and the minute we ask you to do this, it's like, deer in the headlights. But this is exactly why we want to do some practicing. So thank you very much. Eris, you patiently have your hand up. Hello, my dear. Lovely to see you.
Hi. So the thing that we're really pushing for very actively is more class 4 protected bike lanes. And so my message is paint doesn't stop cars. Paint doesn't prevent collisions. Separating the fast things and the slow things from each other does.
Okay, I'm going to give you an A plus. And do you see what she did there, right? So she's been thinking about this for a while, and she's really boiled it down to a way that a 10-year-old can think about it, and that paint does like that's like who can defute that, right? Who can say, "Oh no, it does. You should." So bravo. This is fantastic, Eris. Thank you very much. And I'm excited to watch what happens with you guys on this. Okay, so I want to see who else wants to. Okay, Connie Zabo, do you want to? You have a good one. You've boiled it down really well here. I'd love to hear you say it if you're willing to.
Yeah, so I've got two really that I've been using. One, I'll put my video on. One is driver behavior is determined by road design, because a lot of people, think, oh, well, it's just this individual's behavior. No, the road design allowed them to go 90 miles an hour down the road. The other one that I've been equating, which seems to get a lot of traction right now, is equating, unfortunately, gun violence and traffic violence. And in our city, 2 people get shot a day. But we're seeing 2 to 3 pedestrians or bicyclists get hit every day. And there's not the resources or attention getting drawn to the same number. And that's not including the motorists that get hit as well. That's just pedestrians and bicyclists.
Okay, so what I want to jump in really quick here and say that I like about what you're talking about is that it is important for those of us who are coming at this from biking and walking advocacy to remember that we've got to appeal to the fact that a lot of people driving in cars are following the rules and they're getting hit too. So yeah, I love that you did that. I do want to jump to another person. We've got a great conversation going on here. Thank you so much for that. You did a great job. I want to jump over to Warren Huska. You've got one here that I'd really love you to share on Mike if you're willing to. Thank you, Connie. Again, that was great.
Hi there. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can. Thank you.
Okay, great. I was just sort of tagging on to a comment about paint is not protection. And I was just filling out an online forum about a street rehab that's happening here in Toronto next year. And it was the same conversation about that, version A is a line of paint saying this is where people on bicycles should ride next to parked cars. And option B was we move the cars out and now you can cycle in between the cars and the curb. And my brief comment here was paint is for rule followers and the risk comes from those who break the rules.
I love that. That is so, because that's saying that you're not blaming all drivers. You're blaming the people. You're not blaming all the people who are driving cars. You're blaming the people who are not following the rules. I think that's, please try that. Please use that. I want to hear what
And I
happens.
know even here, Toronto, the Toronto Sun, which is our Fox in print, was, did a survey, and the top peeve that drivers had was not cyclists, it was other drivers. So people are very, very present to the risks on the road, and they're more concerned about the grizzlies than the squirrels, and yeah.
That's another great one. Thank you so much. It's lovely
Sure.
to have you with us today. Michael
Yeah.
Ziarnik, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but Michael, do you want to share a little bit more about what you mean with your answer that you've given us here?
Hello and everyone. Thank you for it's nice to join this conversation. So I've got a bunch of them. I'm fair and honest. I'm a former traffic engineer. Don't tell people that. I'm recovering. So there's a number of them. Is that it's about infrastructure, and it's about the prioritization, and that our engineers have convinced government officials and decision makers level of service for whom? Level of service for those in the automobile, right? And they even talk about a bicycle level of service, which is this very convoluted, pedestrian, that we put pedestrians and bicyclists up over bridges and expect them to go out of their way to zigzag back and forth to go over a bridge, and it's all for the convenience of the motorist. And so as we continue to prioritize speed and the convenience of those in an automobile over someone that doesn't have access to an automobile, I mean, that's what this prioritization is. So I'm a former bicycle and pedestrian coordinator for the Florida Department of Transportation. And so there's a number of messages that that I can play both sides of the discussion in field, because I was a traffic engineer and I know what the prioritization is. And I know the minimum standards to get someone who's able-bodied, 6 foot tall, white, and male across a crosswalk. But that doesn't mean that my grandmother, who used a wheelchair, could get across that crosswalk in the same timing that a traffic engineer.
Tell us what you have a really good pithy piece here that I want you to make sure that you don't miss out on. Like, tell us what your pithy little short.
The paint is not protection, period.
And didn't you write here that we've probably all heard, we'll all have peace on the road when we
yes.
we have our own piece of the road.
Again, and this isn't my wisdom, this is something that I heard in a public meeting, but a lady stood up and said, there will be peace on the road when we all have our own piece of the road. And then, expounded on, paint not being protection and protected bicycle lanes and meaningful infrastructure for people walking so a car can't incur into it. So it's
Great. So what I want to do now, because we started, we had a kerfuffle. So what I'd like to do is, does anybody have any questions about what we covered today? Because you guys stepped up great. I am so excited about what you're sharing with us, how you're reframing things, and love it. But is there anything that we talked about today that we weren't clear enough with you, and that you would like to make sure that either we answer for you right now or that we answer in the handout that we're going to share with you tomorrow?
Melissa, is it unreasonable when the press approach us to ask them, what questions they want to ask us? Because I'm so afraid of gotcha moments.
Yeah, no, I think you should go ahead, and I think Jim wants to say some more about that. Absolutely.
No, Michael, I think that's totally appropriate. And you're really doing it in the service of a two-way conversation, right? So you're actually diffusing the potential for a gotcha by asking, and you want to do this politely and honestly and civilly. Just say, hey, what are we talking about today? I did this with a public affairs program at public radio where they wanted to focus entirely on bicyclist skills as the solution to bikes on sidewalks. And I emailed them in advance and said, I'm not going to be just in case, just so you know, I'm not going to be focused on that. I'm going to be talking about this. And so I don't want you to be surprised. So again, you can be upfront about where you're coming from, and I think it's perfectly reasonable. It's actually really smart business to ask in advance when you can do it. what I found is that broadcast interviews tend to happen with very, very short notice, right? I would get called and say, they'd say, well, we'd like to interview you about this issue. And I'd say, awesome, when do you want to talk? And they'd say, well, we're 5 blocks from your office. Can we talk in 10 minutes, right? So I didn't have a lot of time in that exchange to figure out where they were coming from. But while they're setting up, I would chat them up like, what do you know about the issue? Have you written about this before? Do you ride a bike? Right? Like you can that, and what you're doing is you're actually building rapport with them at the same time that you're getting some useful information to know where they're coming from. So I think it's a great strategy.
I
Everybody
want to, great, thank you very much. Eris, you've got your hand up. I want to make sure we get your question.
Well, this is not a question. This is more just sort of adding it to the pool of meaning here about the gotcha questions, right? I have a few stock answers for the gotcha questions. Mostly now, this particular one, I was giving a talk at a Rotary Club, so it was somewhere where I had a little more time than if I was on the radio. But right, there's always that thing about, well, what do you do about all those bicyclists who are riding on the sidewalk and hitting people? Or what do you do about all those cyclists all those cyclists who don't follow the rules? So my thing is, okay, raise your hand if you have never, while you're driving, exceeded the speed limit, parked in a red zone just for a minute, driven after, a list of common traffic violations. Raise your hand if you can honestly say you've never done any of those, and no one ever raises their hand. And I say, then why do you expect us to be better than you?
Eris, what I love about that answer is that you're creating common cause. You're actually putting everybody on the same side of the issue. Nobody's perfect. I also found generally that questions about individual behavior were a terrible rabbit hole. I was never going to make any progress. Because here's the thing, a lot of the problems we see with roadway safety are systemic in nature, right? It's because of the networks. It's how we design our neighborhoods. It's the laws that govern how roads are operated. Those are all systemic problems. And I would even go so far as to argue that unsafe streets creates unsafe behavior, right? Streets that have very wide traffic lanes and a mile between controlled intersections encourages speeding, right? Streets that have no bike lane or no safe place to ride in the street are going to result in people riding their bikes on the sidewalk. So again, I think I really love your approach of just kind of diffusing the question, reminding everybody that we're actually all on the same side of the issue. That's a great strategy.
So what you're talking about is solutions storytelling, right? So you're bringing the solutions forward, and that makes people feel better. And one of the reasons why Jim was popular with the media and why my husband, Charlie Gandy, is popular with the media is that they brought solutions. So this is something, so that's how you become a media darling with your local media and even your regional and national media. You have a solution. And in Eris's way she was talking about it, she was bringing humor and that common ground, right? And we desperately need that kind of humorous common ground to be on television. We don't just need it in newspapers, we need it to be in radio, but we especially need it to be in television. And television has not been cut back as much as other media. Now, you might live in a part of the country where you don't have your own television station. This was the case when we lived in Long Beach, California. It was actually pretty tough in Long Beach because Los Angeles is the #2 media market. So I had to really work to get us into the regional newspapers, the regional radio stations, and television. But what I want to have all of you think about is you're putting together your strategic plan and how your communications is putting together for going into that this year. And the goals that we talked about is what's the next level of media that you can get on, right? And television and radio, I would say, are really key. And if you're I happen to know where you are, Eris, and because it's my home state. And so what I would say to you is, you're talking about things that has relevance in, like, for the California report, right? And so to get you on their program would be something that Jim and I think would would be like, yeah, let's see how, because those sound bites would come across really, really well for that. So we are just out of time now, but I want to thank everybody. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the chat open for you as I stop the recording here.